Hello, and welcome to our video on the impacts of European exploration and what that means for the New World. There's quite a few impacts to examine, so we're going to look at these five specifically. We're going to look at Christian influence, new colonies that are developed, the Columbian exchange, the slave trade, and mercantilism. And first up, we'll look at how Christian influence impacts the New World and the people living in it. While what might first come to your mind are the Catholic missionaries like the Jesuits that come to the New World, the Protestant movements are also going to be seen, especially in North America. So, the big Protestant countries that are going to be spreading Christianity are going to be in the English and the Dutch. And you have to remember that this is also going on at the same time as the Protestant Reformation in Europe. And we'll see a lot of shakeups happening in Europe that'll cause people to actually want to leave Europe for their safety to practice this new form of Protestantism. And that'll bring a lot of people to the New World to do that. And then in South America, we see the rise of Catholic missionaries, specifically this new order that's created called the Jesuits, who are sent along with explorers like Cortez or Pizarro to try to convert the native people to Catholicism. Um, we do see that in areas of European dominance, there is a lot of conversion going on, and it's largely kind of semi forced conversion. They're going to be very successful in creating new Catholic communities in the New World. But along with that, we're also going to see some religious syncretism going on. So, for one big example, is the idea of Mother Mary or Pachamama, who is the Earth Mother goddess of the Incas. So, this idea that they kind of merge together, Mary, Mother of Jesus, or the Virgin Mary with their native mother god. We'll see some more examples of that, but that's just kind of one of the biggest ones. So we've got all of this Christianity spreading in the New World. Well, how is it different from each other? The There's some pretty big differences. The Spanish colonies, they're not used as permanent settlements for the empire. They send soldiers there, but they're not really sending families there to colonize this area. So what you'll see is more soldiers mixing with native people and slaves, creating completely different racial classifications. And you'll see these large conversion efforts are largely forced. There's going to be a lot of mixing with the native people and the slave population in South America. While in North America, we see these Protestant colonies, there's used more of a permanent settlement situation. So these are often, large families coming together to settle in the New World. There's not as big of an effort in North America to mass convert the natives that we see in South America. And there's little mixing of these people racially as well. Next, we'll take a look at some of the new colonies that are going to develop during this time. I've got a map here to show you exactly kind of which territory is owned by which country. If you ever forget, just think, what language do those people largely speak in that area? And that should probably give you a pretty good clue as to who colonized them. But Europeans will conquer a vast area and is using Jared Diamond's, famous words, using guns, germs, and steel. The major colonizers are going to be France, Spain, England, Portugal, and the Dutch. Which then brings us to one of the most important impacts of all of this exploration, which is the Columbian exchange. The Columbian exchange is the exchanging of food, animals, diseases, and people between the old world and the new. And when I say world, of course, I mean Europe, Asia, and Africa, and New World is in North and South America. So some things that'll come from the new world to the old world are going to be things like tomatoes, potatoes, squash, corn, tobacco, turkeys. So basically, if you eat it at Thanksgiving, there's a great chance it is from the new world. And then, from the old world to the new world, they're going to send them things like wheat, cattle, horses, pigs, uh, some, new fruits and vegetables like grapes or oranges, but then largely also a lot of diseases like smallpox and measles, which is, part of the reason that the Europeans are able to control the New World like they do. And this exchange of new land in areas, they allow for the larger cultivation of cash crops, which are going to directly lead us kind of into our next segment. And because of the Columbian exchange and the rise of triangular trade, which we'll talk about again soon, we see the rise in new port cities that are going to be really influential as well. Places like London, Bristol, Amsterdam, and Antwerp are going to become major commercial hubs in this new era of trading and exploration. which then brings us to our next impact of exploration, which is the development of the African slave trade. Now, if you recall, the introduction of using African people as slaves for Europeans really kind of starts with the Portuguese as they create their trade post cities in Africa. And once Spain and Portugal specifically kind of get going in the New World and they start to create those early cash crops, we see that they start to lean on African labor to do that. They first try it with Native Americans and tried to create this system called the encomienda system, which is basically they were trying to, civilize the natives through making them farm their plantations. And it didn't work because the native people, they were dying in droves due to the diseases spread by Europeans. And it's hard to control a population that's on their own turf. Like they knew the land, they could leave if they wanted to. So, because of that, they start importing slaves from West Africa specifically. The process of getting them to the New World is often referred to as the Middle Passage, where, of course, they, cram these people in like livestock onto these ships where you just have dozens and dozens of people kind of in a small confined space. It's inhumane. It's, very traumatic. The people die in droves there as well because of the force proximity, the lack of air, water, food, and then ultimately they end up in, the Caribbean or in South America someplace where they have a very short lifespan. There's a few reasons they're using people from West Africa specifically for this. One, Portugal already had kind of an established trade in that area. But two, they also chose those people because they were from a similar climate as the colonies, which allows people to kind of easily transfer between these climates and not, die from it. Also, they are immune to those diseases that Europeans carry, and West African rulers were kind of more willing to kind of sell out more interior African people and bring them to the coast to do this. While in the beginning of the slave trade, we see that they mostly just want men from Western Africa. Over time, what we see is that eventually they do start having more women and children come abroad because they want the slave population to kind of recoup itself. The work was so hard, especially in those South American colonies, that people would live about 5 to 7 years after they got there. And so they started, trying to actually take care of the slaves a little bit more towards the later half of the slave trade, just because they realized it was easier to have them self repopulate than to have them, be brought over from Africa. Now, all of these things combined together create what's called triangular trade. So you've got the African people being brought over on the Middle Passage to work the plantations and create all of those raw materials. Those raw materials are then sent over to Europe where they hold all the industry. They don't want their colonies to be able to produce things on their own because they want those colonies to be, beholden to them. So the Europeans manufacture all of those goods and then they send that back to the colonies or to Africa, depending on, what they're trying to achieve. And this leads us to our kind of last major impact early on of this age of exploration, and that's the economic system of mercantilism. Mercantilism is an economic policy created by a Frenchman named Jean-Baptiste Colbert, and it's going to be practiced throughout the 16th through 18th century. And the basic gist of it is that Europe wants to make sure that they have more exports than imports. So they make sure their colonies are providing them with all these really cheap raw materials that they then get to make into finished products. And then they turn around and sell it back to their colonies. Now, there's a lot of rules about this trade. So usually you are not allowed to sell to someone else's colonies unless they specifically did not currently make that thing themselves. This is all going to be economics really run by the state. And it's also going to be driven by that want of gold or silver. So, this is what we call the silver drain. China and these Islamic countries have been charging Europe silver and gold for a long time now because they don't really have any products that those areas want. And so we'll see a lot of, drive for gold and silver mining in the new world because of this. But ultimately, the thing to remember at mercantilism is that it's a way for the mother countries to very strictly control the trade and economies of their colonies. And it's a way to make sure that they stay on top no matter what. And this also is going to, over time, all of these things we've talked about, the slave trade, mercantilism, the Columbian exchange, it's going to lead to some tension among these European countries that are kind of battling it out for this territory and power in the New World. And we'll see it develop in at least these three ways. With the slave trade, we see this new policy develop called Asiento, which allows companies to get monopolies from state issued licenses, which basically just means that it helps fund the slave trade and it keeps Portugal and Spain profiting immensely from this set of licenses that companies have to get from them to, produce the things they want to produce. We also see the Seven Years' War develop between France and England over territory in North America. And we see the Treaty of Tordesillas, which we've talked about in an earlier video, where the Pope equally splits, what they know of from the New World between Portugal and Spain in an attempt to mitigate, growing tensions between them as well. Now, of course, all of those tensions between these European countries don't just go away with these specific initiatives and wars. We'll see that kind of play out a little bit more over time. And that brings us to the end of our video about the impacts of exploration. Thanks for watching.